Hello everybody and welcome to another video. This time we're going to be looking back at the old world and we're looking at some lizard men, which I'm pretty excited to paint. But it's not about them, it's about their movement trays. Let's go. So I'm heavily invested in the old world, but I really quite like lizard men who haven't had new models for a while. Except they have, in a different game system, for Age of Sigmar. So I picked up this box of Seraphon. This is one of those Vanguard boxes that is the equivalent of a combat patrol in Warhammer 40k. Now for me, aside from having stunning models in the box, the best part is that everything is eligible to be used in the old world. We've got some Saurus warriors, a dinosaur, which we're definitely going to be coming back to, and a whole bunch of Kroxigors, which the old ones don't look particularly great, so I'm pleased that these new ones look so amazing. Now this video isn't so much about painting Seraphon or lizard men, but we will come back to that if enough people are interested, because it's a really quick process. The thing I want to draw your attention to is once they're built, these huge AOS models do not rank up, because believe it or not, they weren't designed to. So after finding the best way to stack them horizontally, I had to figure out a way to stack them vertically, and I needed about 2 bases worth of space in between. That should give me enough room for their tails, but I didn't want a big empty space in the middle, so this is all about making a unit filler in a slightly more interesting way so they can still rank up in 2 ranks. Now despite saying that, you will have seen I've cut 3 ranks on one of the Citadel movement trays, and that's because these guys are temple guard, and so they will need a temple to guard. So the image I have in my head on this 3-rank movement tray for 10 guys is to build a temple that covers the back 2 ranks and is floating above the tails of the first rank, so the second rank can be put up on essentially stadium seats. Now I envisaged this temple moving through the jungle on some kind of lizard wizard slan energy, so I started making my raised platform with 2 lots of cork from what was before a cork placemat. Luckily, with Games Workshop movement trays being a pretty uniform size, I was able to use my steel rule and cut 2 similar looking cork sheets, and then I super glued them together. Now realistically I would recommend using hot glue, but I was being lazy and couldn't be bothered to turn my hot glue gun on and plug it in and all that, so I'm using super glue, which turned out to be slightly more of a pain in the long run, but I think it worked out fine. Using slightly thicker cork heat mats that I got from IKEA, I created some stones and glued them onto the bottom. As always, I continually dry fit the models on top to make sure that the height was correct, and I realised this was ever slightly too low, so after doing some weathering with my pliers, I'll go in and make it higher. I want this temple to look old and weathered, as it would be if it had stood in a jungle for millennia, and so I took my pliers and ripped out a bunch of chunks from the front sides and the back sides, just so it wasn't quite so uniform. Now I want to make the back row a bit of a unit filler so I can run this movement tray as 15 temple guard if I want to, which, you know, I think is a pretty cool mechanic in the old world. You paint 10 models, you can run 15, you can run 20 if you put a bit of effort into making some cool unit filler. I'm a fan of that. As far as unit fillers go, this is pretty basic at the back though. It's just 2 stacks of rock, and I'm going to take some of the Saurus warriors' weapons and cut them down to make cool looking totems at the back. Very simple, very easy, and there's plenty of room for a character to stand in the middle. Yes, characters have to be in the front rank in the old world, but I don't think my opponent will mind if, for aesthetic choices, they're standing at the back whilst actually fighting in the front. I'm keeping those lizards close at hand for dry fitting to ensure that those big old tails aren't whacking off the rocks. Poor phraseology aside, as always, dry fitting is essential to ensure that the final result is going to look good. Now, as I was doing this, I was considering what I was going to decorate the underneath with, and the simple solution is just more jungle. What you're going to see when I get to that step is exactly how I base my lizard men normally, which is just some texture paint and some really cool looking colours and plants. So when it comes on to a point where we do some kind of lizard painting tutorial, we probably won't cover the bases, but they are one of my favourite parts. Now, as mentioned previously, it was at this point I realised everything was slightly too short and models were going to start getting stuck at the bottom. So I added another layer of cork and made everything slightly higher, which has the added bonus of making the entire movement tray and the effect look that much more impressive. I primed everything off camera using black for the main base colour and then using white underneath so I could do a cool glow effect, but then I realised I hadn't actually put any texture paste down, so I stopped painting that magenta colour halfway through and added my texture paste. For painting all of the stone effect, I used a sponge technique. I don't want anything particularly special, so I used German grey and then basalt grey just to give it a cool mottled effect. The main thing to be wary of here is that cork can be quite fragile, so don't stab too hard, otherwise you'll start having bits flake off, especially in those areas where I've pulled things apart with pliers. After the initial base colours are down, we can use some cool washes, including Athonian Camoshade and Bale Tarn Green, to create some nice green texture. It's going to be mossy, it's going to be dirty, it's had plants growing all over it for millennia. I think this is looking quite good considering its age, to be honest. The Athonian Camoshade in particular looks really good on this old stone, so I do recommend picking up a pot, though this is the first time I've used mine in several years. The Bale Tarn Green is much brighter, so I'm using this a bit more sparingly on a few areas and also all over the mud on the bottom, because the jungle ground is often quite lush and has bits of mud sticking through, so this is the perfect way to get that effect really easily before we start putting on tufts and plants. All of the tufts and laser cut plants you're about to see are from Gamergrass. They don't sponsor this video and probably never will because I'm a tiny channel, but they're absolutely awesome stuff, so do recommend picking them up. I particularly like these alien rosettes that can be stacked together if you want, but I generally only use one so I can make them last a bit longer. You bend them with some tweezers and glue them down using some super glue, and I think they add a nice bit of colour to this top deck, and they'll also add a ton of colour to the bottom deck too. It's also worth mentioning that there's some tiny tufts and standard sized tufts on the top. The other plants that I were using included this little banana tree, which I think is very cool, the things we can do with laser cut technology these days. Once again, just bending it up to make it look a bit more lifelike with my tweezers. This is going to take up a good chunk of space and hide a lot of the work that's going on down below. Well, there is really something satisfying about just putting plants onto a jungle base. I definitely want to do more of this. I think some more of my movement trays are going to look like this because this is fun. Maybe not the whole temple thing, but definitely some jungle unit fillers. That's the way to go. The final thing to do for this specific movement tray was to colour in all the areas that aren't covered in jungle just with my standard Black Legion. Make it nice and clean, ready for those models to go on. And honestly, that's it. I had a real good time making this, and I hadn't intended to at the beginning. It was only when I realised that the models were far too big that I had to do something creative in order to rank them up properly for a game system they weren't really designed for. I hope you enjoyed this one. As always, I've been Sam. See you next time.